Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We are joined today by Ambassador Chas Freeman, the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense. So thank you for coming back to the program. It's good to see you, my friend.
Glad to be with you, Glenn.
So I want today to, take a step back and look at the shift in world order and how the countries are repositioning themselves. Because, after the Cold War, I remember the immense optimism, the political convictions. They kind of reflected the whole theory that we had reached the end of history, and the world was expected to embrace liberal democracy, human rights, and align under the leadership of the United States. And it would be, so peaceful, it would almost be boring. This was the thesis. And again, this was almost adopted as truism of a lot of the politicians over the next years. But if we jump forward to the present time, we see now, NATO having started a proxy war against Russia. U.S. bombed Iran's nuclear reactors. We have joined forces with Al Qaeda and ISIS in places like Libya and Syria. Total ethnic cleansing seems to be the objective of Gaza. There's an obsession with breaking China and possibly even war. And there is now seems that Washington is contemplating a decapitation strike against Venezuela. If one will go to Europe, we can see everything from economic decline, democracy decline, war enthusiasm, collapse of relevance, and the desperation also seems to strengthen the crazies. Meanwhile, if we look east, the Eurasian giants seem to be building a new world, economic and political, without us. And I thought, who's better to talk to than you, as you were there in the 1990s. You were then the Assistant Secretary of Defense. You also had a central role in planning the post-Cold War security architecture. And now that we come here, what is your diagnosis? Because it's we went from this immense optimism. A lot of this you can tell by all politicians is genuine, yet we went off the rails at some point, it seems. I mean, how did we end up in this position?
Well, that's a very good summary of
Sorry, also a very big question. So
of a lot of things that have happened. You reminded me that before I was Assistant Secretary of Defense, I was ambassador to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia when Saddam Hussein and Iraq invaded and attempted to annex Kuwait. And I recall the very first highly classified, restricted short telegram that I wrote after that said that we could not advise the president, George H.W. Bush, that we could not accept the new world order that would follow the Cold War as beginning with the annexation of a small country by a larger aggressor, and that we had to reinforce international law and the ideals of the UN Charter. I think the only thing from that telegram that was taken aboard was the phrase New World Order, which was immediately distorted to be some sort of conspiratorial hegemonic thing. But it turned out to be that in the end. And I think what has happened now is that the unipolar moment that Charles Krauthammer identified is clearly gone completely. And you can see that in every sphere. I don't know if you watched on September 7th. Well, September 3rd, there was a major military parade in Beijing following the meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which has now grown a number of new institutions, including an SCO bank, apparently, to be chartered and to facilitate the integration of development planning through basically the entire non-European part of the Eurasian continent. Very interestingly, the American reaction to this is that it's all aimed at the United States. I don't think it was. I think it's aimed at doing what the Belt and Road Initiative has been aimed at doing, namely integrating Eurasia in the expectation that if that common space is interconnected in the correct way, China, which is the main sponsor of the Belt and Road Initiative, will naturally, as a result of its size and dynamism, emerge as the leader in Eurasia. From a strategic point of view, talking about geostrategic considerations, the great fear of American strategists always has been that Eurasia will come under hegemonic control and threaten the United States. This is not hegemonic control by China or Russia or India or Iran or any of the other, or Pakistan or any of the other participants in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But it is a step toward merger of the BRICS grouping, which includes Brazil and other countries that are not on the Eurasian landmass. The incorporation of the BRICS and the SCO into a single structure from which the United States is excluded largely by choice. When China chartered the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, they invited Washington to join. The United States declined. So did Tokyo. Otherwise, pretty much everybody in the world joined that organization, which instead of turning out to be a deviation from the post-World War II order, has turned out to be an affirmation of it, following the same rules that the World Bank does, and in many cases, co-financing with the World Bank. So I think one point that has to be registered immediately is that neither the BRICS nor the Shanghai Cooperation Organization nor the other regional organizations that are coming into being want to overthrow the post-World War II order as the United States and others charge. They want to restore it because it has been attacked and dismantled by the United States. So you see references to restoring the power, authority, and scope of the World Trade Organization coming out of the SCO, coming out of the BRICS. You see references to the UN Charter, which you never see now in Western statements about things. You see an affirmation of the Westphalian Order, an emphasis on national sovereignty, freedom of choice, freedom of system choice, and immunity from intervention in internal affairs. This in the part of the world that is forming a bloc, which is united only by its decision to keep the United States out of it. We've just had an illustration of what is going on in the part of the world that the United States continues to exercise free reign in, with the Israeli violation of Qatari sovereignty, a sneak attack on a residential compound in Doha, the capital of Qatar, probably involving the violation of Jordanian, Saudi, and Iraqi airspace by 10 stealth Israeli fighter jets and bombers, F-35s of one variety or another. And we see the world condemning this on two grounds. One, that assassination is an improper, illegal, unseemly, inhumane, and ineffectual means of conducting foreign policy. That is something the entire world, other than Donald Trump, agree on. He did not condemn the assassination of, as it turned out, the wrong people in Doha. He clearly, having snuffed out General Soleimani in his first term, has no objection to transnational assassination. And Israel is the heir to the Hashashin, that is the Ismaili terrorists who came into being at the end of the 11th century and who terrorized the Middle East for 2 centuries before they abandoned that tradition. It conducts a foreign policy which is entirely without regard to international law, cruel, sadistic, and largely based on the fallacious theory that you can change trends by murdering those at the top of organizations involved in them. So anyway, I mean, I think the major thing that is happening in terms of reorganization is that the West is retreating into the equivalent of the citadel while everyone else is advancing. You see globalization continuing everywhere outside the transatlantic region. Both Europe and in North America, with the exception of Canada, are averse now to the very processes that brought prosperity and raised people out of poverty all over the world. But it's going on everywhere else. We've just seen, for example, a Chinese-ASEAN free trade agreement amendment, which will greatly strengthen Chinese-ASEAN trade relations and investment relations. ASEAN is already China's largest trading partner. That is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which is about to be joined by Timor-Leste. So we're seeing regional agglomerations arise, which in one sphere or another are quite powerful, and which have in common only one thing, that is the United States is absent. So much for the unipolar moment. Well, I started to say, if you watch that parade on September 3rd in Beijing, you will have been greatly impressed by the fact that China now has the ability to defend itself. And that parade was intended to demonstrate that. We're here, don't mess with us. 4 days later, September 7th, was Brazil Day, which is the national holiday of Brazil. There was a military parade in Brazil, very colorful, very impressive. But what was more impressive was the huge number of people who attended that parade who wore hats affirming Brazilian sovereignty against the United States. Why? Because a petulant, impetuous American president has demanded changes in Brazilian domestic constitutional practices and the rule of law in order to protect his bosom buddy, Jair Bolsonaro, who staged an attempted coup against an election rather similar to that Mr. Trump pulled off in January 6, 2021. So clearly we're seeing a world in which, as you know, I prefer the word multinodal to multipolarity. Multinodal realities are coming about. Nodes are being established by regional associations intended to replicate and restore the lost world of the American-sponsored post-World War II order, with its deference to the rule of law, its creation of common institutions to regulate relations between states, its liberalization of trade and investment regimes, and its openness to innovation. That is all gone in terms of what is happening in the transatlantic region. I've gone on far too long, and I probably said nothing of significance, but I think I shall stop here. There are many, many other aspects to this.
Well, you mentioned Krauthammer, who was in 1990, coined this term, a unipolar moment, to signify that it was only one center of power. Now, in that article, I thought it's interesting because he argues something along the line that, well, this is just the reality of the power distribution, so we have to act accordingly. But however, in the future, the world will become then have many poles of power. But we'll adjust then. And I remember when I read it, I thought to myself, well, it's fine and well then and there, but 30 years later, you have had a whole new generation of politicians grown up under the ideological conviction that this is the normal state of things, that the political West, we will sit on top. We don't. This is how security is created. This is how our values are able to survive. It is dependent on this. So the idea that the distribution shift and okay, we'll just adjust our policy accordingly, it's not playing out as such. And I think it's a great shame though, because if, as you said, the Eurasian now, it's balanced. There's no hegemon which can dominate all of it. And this is very different from the past, because in the 19th century, when the British they have good reason to fear the Russian Empire, which had both the intentions, it seemed, and the capabilities of pursuing hegemon in Eurasia. In the 20th century, you had the Soviets, I would say, with the capabilities, possibly the intentions to have a hegemon in Eurasia. But today, there's even China's the most powerful and can't dominate the region. If it would walk back, I guess, these ideas of many centers of power and having civilizational diversity in favor of some hegemonic model, you would see even their closest friends, like the Russians, turning against them. So you have now this balance of power in Eurasia. This is, but still, we won't partake, and all this blocking of it, as you also suggested in 2015 when the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank was launched. Madeleine Albright made this comment that we were trying to isolate it, but we ended up isolating ourselves. This was the lesson, and it would have been an important lesson if we had learned it, I guess, but we seem to remaking that same lesson. I did want to ask, though, about what do you see happening with the US-European partnership? Because for the Americans, even when they wanted to avoid European affairs and didn't care too much about the European imperialists, they still recognized that the world was Eurocentric. And of course, after World War II, the Americans became effectively a European power by being the leading force on the continent. But with this new world emerging, what do you see happening with this transatlantic partnership? Because this is something that the Europeans don't have the political imagination to imagine any change at all. So what do you expect happening here?
Well, that's quite a lot of questions. Let me start with the
I'll start this
issue of
with
Europe,
carry
which, because some of the indicators of what is going to happen will occur, I believe, in the context of Article 4, North Atlantic Treaty Organization consultations, following the Russian violation of Polish airspace with drones, 4 of which apparently were shot down quite deep into Polish territory. I don't think this was, as the Secretary General of NATO appears to believe, a deliberate Russian effort to test NATO's resolve. I'm sure there's another explanation. I know that Moscow has quite predictably denied that that was the case. But the question of Article 4, which is the mechanism for NATO consultations in response to the belief of a member state that its security, territorial integrity, or independence are threatened, will tell us a lot about how the transatlantic relationship now works. There's still an American general at Mons. The United States remains the dominant power in Brussels and within NATO. Europeans, however, seem less and less united, less and less capable of mustering responses to events. I mean, we see situations like the overthrow of, I think, the 5th prime ministership under Macron in France, and a movement called Bloquons tout. We will block everything, or let's block everything, which is a measure of the disaffection of the populace in a democracy, a Western democracy, from its leadership. And I think that is a fairly general phenomenon. You can see it in Germany, where I think Chancellor Merz is not in tune with the majority of German opinion on crucial issues for Germany's future. The one country, oddly enough, that seems within the traditional Western European cluster to be not so troubled by this is Italy, under Meloni, who is an avowed fascist, but quite a gentle fascist, evidently. So I think the relationship between the United States and Europe is one that's evolving. Mr. Trump, in his first term, attempted to withdraw a lot of forces from Europe. He wasn't successful because the establishment, the so-called deep state, opposed him. I think it's very likely he will do so now. And in fact, there are indications of that. And if you read the draft national security strategy that Elbridge Colby and others have concocted, you see a retreat by the United States to the Western Hemisphere, where we apparently propose to exercise a much more forceful late 19th century, early 20th century's form of hegemony. We also seem to be free within this sphere in our own minds to commit murder on the high seas, to snuff out people whom we've never identified, but we claim are engaged in a criminal act. Rather than boarding the speedboat, we bombed it and destroyed it. So we'll never know who they were, or whether they had any contraband aboard or not. This is another set of changes. But you raised quite a range of issues. Let me go back to the meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There are 4 great power centers on the Eurasian landmass, considering Europe and India as extensions of Eurasia, peninsulas. 3 of them were present in Tianjin. One was absent, that was Europe. Europe is increasingly estranged from the United States. The United States is shutting itself off as a market for everyone, practicing protectionism, behaving erratically and unpredictably in ways that make effective intercourse with the United States very difficult. Just ask Hyundai or South Korea about the incredible immigration enforcement raid on their largest investment in the United States, $7.2 billion project in Georgia to produce batteries and electric vehicles. That project has been suspended now, and I don't know what the future will be. The United States does not have the skilled workforce to operate that factory, does not have the immigration policy necessary to enable legally imported workforce to do that. And so I don't know where that's going. But the Europeans face a similar dilemma, and we see an attenuation of transatlantic ties, tourism way off because people fear what might happen to them if they come within the jurisdiction of the American immigration police and are subjected to the lawlessness of those police in what is an emerging police state in the United States. Again, I think we'll see a lot from the consultations over the intrusion into Poland. I note another thing. Again, you asked so many questions all in one that I'll try to do justice to your statement. The moment that Israel attacked Doha, Qatar, is basically the day that the UN General Assembly convened. And one of the main items on the General Assembly list is the recognition of a Palestinian state. Another item on the General Assembly agenda, even before this, was to utilize the Uniting for Peace mechanism to have the General Assembly override the veto power of the United States in the Security Council. I think the likelihood of that has just gone up considerably. I know that even a disunited Europe under von der Leyen has finally suspended transactions with Israel that benefit Israel in the context of its attempted annihilation of the Palestinians. Spain, a country which seems remarkably sensible in the current context, both in terms of not overestimating the Russian threat and in terms of reacting with dignity and respect for law to the horrors in the Levant, in Israel and Palestine. Spain has just taken forceful measures to suspend most of its relationships with Israel. And I don't think you can discount this as a trend within the overall transformation of global politics. Israel has been revealed as a criminal state, cruel, sadistic, unrestrained by any rules. And this brings me back to your comment about the rules-bound order, as it were, which was a Biden administration G7 special. Basically, we make the rules, we decide who has to follow them, we decide who is exempted from them, we exempt ourselves, but the rest of you in the world knuckle up and do what we tell you. This is not a world order based on international law. It is not the post-World War II order. It is something quite different. It resembles a tyranny rather than the relative democracy of politics in an earlier era. And against all of this, we see, as I said, various regional coalitions coming together. In Europe, we have the coalition of the deluded, which is dealing with Ukraine. In Tianjin, we saw the coalition of the defiant and the defensive, who will not subject themselves, not accept intrusions into their sovereignty. There's, of course, a little backpedaling. Nobody wants to take risks. So we see the Indians, who have never never taken the bait the United States has offered them over decades to become aligned against the Soviet Union or Russia or China. We've seen them backpedal a little bit because their basic policy of non-alignment requires at least a moderately good relationship with the United States. So they're hoping for a reprieve from the current antagonism. Lots of things are in motion. Where they all end in terms of detail is very hard to say. But I suspect if you look 30 years from now, since you raised the question of Francis Fukuyama's delusion about the end of history, if history does in fact continue for another 30 years, we don't blow ourselves up or cook ourselves to death in a climate crisis, then I think what we will see is a number of regional associations cooperating in something rather like the post-World War II order, but excluding the United States from this. And there may be a few countries associated with the United States, but I could not instantly name which will want to be, given the behavior of the Trump administration at present, which is bullying, extortionate, and unpredictable and unreliable. So it is said, and I finish on this, that Qatar is a great ally of the United States. Of course, that is a misnomer. It's not an ally. It has no commitment to the United States. But it is a partner of the United States, the largest air base the United States has in the Middle East, was apparently unable to detect and defend against an Israeli attack. Perhaps it had been advised in advance to ignore the evidence, because there's a lot of evidence that the Trump administration, despite its denials, knew about this in advance. And so if you're a Qatar and you, like India, follow a policy of non-alignment or multiple alignments, as a balancing act, what do you do? Can you trust the United States to defend you? Obviously not. Will the $42 billion American deal to put defensive equipment, air defense equipment and the like, into Qatar be replaced by a Chinese contract? I mean, if you wanted to set up a situation where Qatar and China had every reason to cooperate, you just did it. Because the Chinese believe strongly in sovereignty. They have issued the strongest statement they've ever issued in condemnation of Israeli violations of sovereignty. They, like the countries of the Middle East, are not prepared to accept Israeli domination from the air, an aviation hegemony, if you will. Israel is preparing to attack Iran again. The last time it did that, it resulted in an Iranian strike on Al Udeid Air Base, the American-operated Qatari air base. So I think the other point is that the states of the region, including the United Arab Emirates, which participated in the so-called Abraham Accords, have also strongly condemned Israel, as has Saudi Arabia, and they are coalescing into an anti-Israeli coalition. For the first time, they seem openly to be doing that. Earlier, I speculated that, in fact, this was a major driver of the rapprochement between Iran and these countries, the Arab countries of the Gulf. I think that's been given further impetus despite the threat to Iran. And so game-changing events are occurring, not just in West Asia, not just in Eastern Europe, but across the entire Eurasian landmass, in South America, in the Caribbean basin, where the United States threatens regime change and invasion of Venezuela, and in Africa, which is undergoing multiple changes, some of them quite horrifying, others affirmative. So the world is in flux in a way that we don't seem to be able to deal with. And I would just say, for a country like Israel, which has hitched its wagon entirely to the United States, this must be very unnerving, because if the United States can't protect Qatar, it also can't protect Israel, as it demonstrated during the Iranian response to the Israeli surprise attack in June. Everything the United States and Israel were able to do was not enough to protect military and infrastructure installations in Israel. And if there is another round, as there looks like there will be, I expect Iran to devastate Israel.
Yeah, I have a hard time understanding the Israeli policy, though, because you would expect, as you said, they have hadn't had to make any compromise over the past few decades because, well, they linked themselves up with the United States. But if you see that your main sponsor is in relative decline, you would assume that they would want to cement a new deal today, something that cements the status quo, makes it acceptable to neighbors. So make the necessary concessions. But instead, it's the opposite. It's throwing all the chess pieces in the air and hope that it lands somewhere favorable.
Well, it's worse than that, actually, Glenn, because the UN General Assembly is coming up. I think there's a fair chance that Israel's membership will be suspended, as the South African membership was when the world finally woke up to the horrors of apartheid. I think the chances are good that there may be a Uniting for Peace resolution of some sort to take action against Israel. I doubt there will be military intervention, which is the only practical answer to Israeli aggression. But there could well be punitive measures against Israel authorized by the General Assembly over the veto of the United States. The question of the viability of the UN system as the world regionalizes and globalizes outside New York has arisen. Many countries now demand the removal of the UN from New York because the United States no longer respects the headquarters agreement and has banned the Palestinian delegation, which it has an obligation under the headquarters agreement to receive. So we have, we've seen the World Trade Organization, the WTO, destroyed essentially. Now we may be seeing the UN being destroyed. Something new will arise in its place. The League of Nations failed after all and was replaced by the UN. But whatever is going to replace the UN will have to go back to Krauthammer's comment, reflect the constellation of power in the world. And that constellation is no longer concentrated in the West. The fact that Britain, France, and the United States, as well as China and Russia, have permanent membership in the Security Council reflects a bygone era. Britain and France are not world powers now, much as they might wish to be. And the United States no longer sways the world in the manner that we did. So I think many events are coming together as catalysts for change. Exactly what change they will produce, we can't say.
I wanted to ask though about Iran, because it appears to be a bit of a wild card. Again, if you look at the large Eurasian powers, a lot of their interest seems very clear cut. For example, the Russians and Chinese, they don't want containment, so they have to work together to create an alternative economic system. New currencies and transportation corridors and technologies, all this. The Indians, of course, they not going to line this heavily in because they want to be non-aligned, so they will look for an opportunity not to work with everyone, including the United States, hoping this will blow over. But Iran, they are a bit cautious about getting too dependent on any external power, but they have a lot of enemies. And as you said, the Israelis, as well as the United States, doesn't appear to be done with Iran. What do you expect? I mean, if you were advising the Iranians, what kind of a advice, or in general, what kind of a direction do you think they might go? Because despite them having some, you can say, success in this 12-day war with the Israelis, it's not a great position to be in, because they can't really give too much punishment to the Israelis either, because the Israelis could use a nuclear weapon. I mean, after all we've seen over the past years now, I wouldn't put it past anyone that this is not reasonable.
Correct. Yeah, well, I think one of the aspects of Iran that makes it different is that it is like China, as Russia claims, like Europe as a whole. It is a civilizational state. It's been in existence for millennia. It has had a coherent existence in one form or another for at least 2,500 years. And therefore, its supreme national interest is the preservation of its national identity, its independence, its strategic autonomy, of course. And yet, the United States and Israel together have narrowed Iranian options greatly. And this brings me to the effects of various things that are happening in the financial sector on the reach of American sanctions. We have in the Senate, with 85 sponsors, an absurd piece of legislation which would introduce secondary sanctions on any purchaser of Russian oil or gas. This means China, India, basically, this is writing off the entire world with sanctions. It's not viable. It would fail. It would cause the global economy to suffer apoplexy and die. So I don't think it's likely. But Along with this, the attitude behind it is creating more and more challenges to the single currency system that has prevailed in global trade and investment since Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944. The dollar supremacy is being rapidly eroded. And you see the beginnings of this. For example, the decision of various Russian corporate entities to issue panda bonds, meaning bonds denominated in the Chinese renminbi yuan currency. You see this in swap arrangements between more and more countries and the Chinese yuan. You see this with an advancing relationship between Iran and China and Russia outside the SWIFT framework. That is the Brussels clearinghouse for international monetary transactions, from which Iran has been excluded as Russia, as basically. So an alternative currency universe is being brought into being. And here there's a lot of confusion. I would say there's a distinction between reserve currency. Reserve currencies are currencies which are held because they are believed to have stable value, and they therefore safeguard value, and trade settlement. Trade settlement is the fundamental issue, and more of it is not being done in the dollar. More and more of it is being done in other currencies, including the Chinese currency. China's trade now is, I think the majority of it is actually being settled in Chinese yuan. So if your currency is widely used and acceptable as a mechanism for trade settlement, transaction settlement, then it qualifies as a reserve currency. And so we see, in fact, more and more people holding currencies other than the dollar as reserve currencies. Meanwhile, in this year, the dollar has declined by about 12 or 13% in value relative to other currencies. So it is not holding value. We have an assault domestically on the major pillar that has kept the dollar central to the global economy, namely the Federal Reserve. The president is trying to take down the Federal Reserve and impose a political agenda on it. We have a situation, we are beginning to enter a period in which the effects of tariffs are being felt, and there's massive inflation in prospect, even as the economy goes into recession. That is called stagflation. It is a recipe for further decline. So all these things come together, and they affect Iran because they make a country like Iran more and more able to maneuver outside the realm of the dollar, more and more able to withstand dollar-based sanctions. There's just not to say that Iran is doing well economically. It's not. And there are many dissatisfactions in Iran. But here, too, we have the effect of the American and Israeli attacks on Iran, which appear to have, for a time at least, rallied the populace behind the regime. Or maybe they don't like the regime, but they're rallied behind their leaders within that regime. So I don't know where Iran is going. I think it is almost certain that the Israelis will not tolerate a strategically autonomous Iran. They will continue to try to bring it down. Every time, we've seen a common pattern. It was just replicated in Qatar. That is the Israeli belief that if you wipe out the leadership, you change the equation. This is what they did with Nasrallah in Lebanon. It's what they did with Sinwar in Gaza. It's what they tried to do in Iran with the assassination of the Ayatollah and Pezeshkian, the prime minister, the president, sorry. It's what they tried to do with Hamas. It doesn't work, and yet they meet the Einstein definition of insanity by doing it again and again and expecting different results. So if they will attack Iran, I think, is far better prepared to respond than Israel is to launch an attack. But the Israelis are very clever. They will do something unexpected, and who knows what will happen.
I would like to ask more about Europe, the coalition of the deluded, but I think we run out of time, so we're going to have to do that next time. So,
The coalition of the deluded will not disband in the near future.
on that note, thank you for your time. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Glenn.